Good afternoon. This is the Devar Torah on Parshas Eikev. It's the third Parsha of Sefer Devarim, last book of the Torah. However, it is an interesting time of a year. Last week was Parshas Vayikanon, which is the Parshas Nakamu, Parsha of consolation, after we literally one day before rose from the ashes of Tisha B'Av, saddest day in the year. And this year, and this week's Parsha, and it gave certain promises of encouragement. And this year, Parsha, it's even more true, because during the past week, the week of Parshas Eikev, which culminates with the reading of Parshas Eikev on Shabbos, the 15th of Tu B'Av, definitely Hebrew letters, Tu B'Av is celebrated, and the whole month of Av takes on a very different feel. Tu B'Av was a very special day, and what I'm going to show is how Parshas Eikev, even though it has some warnings and admonitions, is encouraging Jewish people to fulfill the mitzvahs, to fulfill the commandments, and benefit fully from being connected to Hashem. Now, Tu B'Av, first of all, 7 major things occurred of a positive nature. Intermarriage was last between tribes. Once Yeshua and Bnei Israel conquered the land, because it had been prohibited, because if women who had a father who had no sons, they would be inheriting the land, and they did not want the land to shift. Second miracle was once a year, in the 39 years of punishment, for them to make sure that Hashem promised that generation of men from ages 20 to 60 would not enter the land of Israel. And once a year, they would dig a grave, and those whose you meant to be taken would go to sleep, would not wake up in this world anyway. And this year, the 40th year, the people went into the grave expecting not to wake up the next day. And to their amazement, they did survive. This was on Tu B'Av, and they came to realize they were going to be allowed to enter Israel. The tribe of Benjamin was also allowed to intermarry after the incident of the concubine. And finally, after a number of years of strangers from the other tribes, they were allowed to. Also was a celebratory day, one of the times when we had the temple, because that day culminated was the completion of preparing all the wood that was going to be needed in the temple for the next 6 months. One was not able to cut wood after that because it started drying, and therefore risked exposure to insects, and that kind of wood could not be offered. King Hoshea, head of the northern kingdom, finally took down the guards and let people from the northern kingdom again resume coming and worshiping in the temple. 6th one was the nights get noticeably longer. Why is that a reason for celebration? Because the evening and night are the ideal time for learning Torah. And finally, the Romans, after an extended period, finally let the Jews bury the dead from Beit Torah, which was hundreds of thousands. And the miracle was not one body had decomposed. They were in the same condition as when they were fallen substantial time before. So those are special events in themselves. However, two other things, as explained by the Bnei Yissaschar, there is another thing going on. Tu B'Av is the 40th day. It's the beginning of the 40-day period and culminating on 25th of Elul, when the universe was created. According to the other opinion, there's a debate in the Gemara. It started on Shvat and ended in years when we only have one Adar, would ended on the 25th of Adar, which was the beginning of the physical creation of the universe. And it's another significance to the 40-day period is Hashem, a heavenly voice that Hashem directs, will announce 40 days before a child is conceived that Tony Almani so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, will marry the daughter of so-and-so. And that's Peshat. So what's the significance? What does that have to do with us here? Is that the people at what shidduch, so to speak, what engagement was being announced? It was between Hashem and the Bnei Israel. And then, in other words, Hashem was going to be connected like a groom to a bride. And that's the other significance. It also has more implications, which as we get closer to Rosh Hashanah, I will be explaining. And that is, and that was up in heaven. Now in the Aya world, spiritual worlds, here there's also a significance. Tu B'Av, the unmarried women would dress up in white gowns, and to make sure that there was no favoritism, the rich girls and the poor girls exchanged dresses, so everybody was on an equal footing, so to speak. And then they would go dance in the forest, and the young men who were looking for a bride would watch them dance. Now, again, this was only in a very limited time when there was a temple, and it was only 2 days a year, the other being Yom Kippur afternoon after the Kohen Gadol did the Yom Kippur service, and we were forgiven. And in fact, the women tell the men, don't look for physical beauty, but look for a woman who fully fears, in other words, totally in awe of Hashem. And that's the true. And we say that every Friday night in Eishes Chayil, near the end of Eishes Chayil, last chapter of Mishlei, Proverbs. And so that's another significance. So we're seeing very many promising things. It's the same with the Parsha, because the Parsha that Eikev starts with begins. Well, first of all, what does the Eikev mean? Hayeh Eikev tishmon et mishpatim she'ele shematem sismo sam shemora Hashem Elokecha l'cha et brit ve'et chesed asher nishva l'avosam. This should be your reward when you shall hearken. I understood with the reading of the Ramban, when you will hearken to these ordinances and you should observe and perform them, Hashem, your God, will safeguard you, for you the covenant and the kindness that he swore to your forefathers. It then goes on to all the promises and saying they shouldn't fear entering the land. And in the next parak, it talks about sings the praises of Israel, the land of Israel, which I'll have more to say about shortly. And it's again Hashem is going to help them, but Moshe warns that it's not because of any merits of theirs. They're not getting Eretz Israel, which was Eretz Canaan, because of anything they did. In fact, they've been rebelling constantly, which in the desert for 40 years, which Moshe reminds them of, and they're going up because the other nations deserve to be expelled from the Holy Land of Israel. And the Parashat then goes on, after mentioning the sins, again promising, reminding what Hashem did taking him out of Egypt and the desert, and Moshe got to do a second set of tablets because the first one was destroyed when he saw the people were worshiping Yehuzah. And he again reminds them about the rebellions. This alternating thing was a promise plus rebellions. And it then goes into the second parshas of Shema Yisrael. That's the 3 paragraphs that said twice a day, every day, and promises what will happen. And then goes into a final declaration of what the success will be. We enter Eretz Israel. That was a discussion whether it was just the first entry or the ultimate entry, which we are experiencing now. Now, a few things I'd like to focus on in this parsha is I'd like to discuss the beginning of it and show, because there's a lot of promises there. There's a lot of great potential. Then I would like to talk about the 7 special species of Eretz Israel and conclude with the second paragraph of Shema and what its ultimate significance is. Now, it's Eikev, I'm translating according to Rambam. The Orachaim also explains this, that in other words, on 2 levels, national level, when we listen to all of Hashem's ordinances, right, when we are truly joyful at listening to all of his commands, not just enough to do the mitzvahs, one must have joy that's serving Hashem and learning his Torah. And as the Orachaim goes on to explain, this also applies on the individual level. As long as a person has not completed his service, he should not trust his own righteousness. And that he, in other words, he must be careful all the days of his life. And it's also talking about what is another mitzvah. One must learn Torah in the state of joy, not in the state of sadness, and we must be joyful that Hashem filled the whole world. It's explained in the Zohar that there can be no greater joy for the Holy One is when the Jewish people study the Torah. That was the whole purpose he created the universe for, so that the human race could be perfected. And that simcha vision fills the entire world. And it also talks about Eikev, can also have the meaning of heal. So what's going on? There's, in other words, mitzvahs, what appear so-called minor commandments, that we don't know what the reward of each one is. It's talking about heal. In other words, people might grind them into the ground. To really learn Torah and do mitzvahs, you have to have humility and lowliness. And once we do that, once we do all this, we will be getting the ultimate redemption. This is talking about the end of days, when we will inherit all of the land, not just the 7 Canaanite lands. Because originally Abraham was promised 10, and 3 of those were the Bnei Moab, the Bnei Amnon, and the Bnei Esau. So we did not get those lands because we didn't fulfill the mitzvahs the first time we entered. We only got the 7 lands. And that is that is another significance. And I'd now like to go on to the verse talking about these 7 species. There are 7 species that are most praised. And these 7 species I would like to discuss now. And these 7 species are as follows. And it says, it's actually starting in Pasuk Zion 7. Ki Yishem Elokecha b'via el eretz tova va'eretz nachalei mayim ayam mot yotzim b'bakia b'har eretz kita shara Geffen Tanea Rimon Eretz Zayed Shemen V'Davash. It's a land. It says you're bringing to a land. If this, in other words, we do the mitzvahs, a land with streams of water, of springs and underground water coming forth from valley and mountain, a land of wheat, barley, grape, fig, and pomegranate, land of olive oil, wild olives, and date honey. And it then talks about, and it goes on, you will eat and be satisfied. Oh, then where you will eat bread without poverty, you will lack nothing there. Land whose stones are iron, from those whose mountains will mine copper. You will eat and be satisfied, and bless Hashem, God, for the good land that He gives you. Now, again, that comes with a warning. You have to fulfill the commandments. Moshe warns them that they shouldn't act too superior or ungrateful, because all of the land and stuff they inherit, would Hashem gave them from the previous nations occupying the land, and that they shouldn't eventually wax arrogant and say that we did this by our own 2 hands, which will also lead them to idol worship. And that's on one level. And so it's a very different land than Nile, where they had fixed rainfall. Everything will come to us, but it's all in Hashem's beneficence. It's all at His desire. Now, there's some deeper meanings, a couple of which, many deeper meanings, but a couple of which I'd like to Eretz Nachi Mayim in Yos B'Tulamos Yotzei Bekia, and then Eretz Kita Shior Geffen Tanei Rimon Eretz Zayit V'Shemen V'Davash. Now, on a deeper level, and this is based on the teachings of Rav Shimshon Ma'astropoli, that then the Parashat has 3
languages, Nachali, Inyonos, Utamos. There's three things we're talking about how we're going to benefit and inherit, and that's connected the Mikra, which is the written Torah, the Mishnah and Gemara. And he says there's another thing going on. So in other words, it's all based on Torah learning, both written and oral. And Devar Acher. Another meaning is that it's talking about the three parts of the written Torah, Torah, Nevi'im, and Suvim. Now, it then goes on to talk, brings a breakdown of the different species, and let's take them in order. He speaks about Chita, Shor, and Geffen. Chita, and Shara, Shara, Zero. Those three, if you look at the Gematria, take the letters of them, they'll come up to Taryag, which is 613 mitzvahs we must command keep, both the positive ones, which are building in our spirituality, and negative ones we're not supposed to do, prohibitions. And that Gematria is, by the way, is a creed because the word Chita is Malay, they add a Yud. There's two ways of Gematria. Ki Yaharik, it's a part of the laying of the Torah, the Makom of Yud. And on top of that, there's yet another meaning. And the other meaning is the first five of the species, they represent the 5 books of the Torah. And then it says, he goes on to say, but we have 2 more species. There's Zayat Shemen, the olive oil, and the Vash, the honey. It's 2 of them. Now that adds up to 7. He is not giving us a math lesson here, but he's saying something very deep. That what does that refer to? That's talking to the Sefer of the Torah, the books of the Torah, of which he said there are 7, because there's a vision in one of the portraits of Midbar. And it's keeping something very deep. Since Sefer Bamidbar is broken into 3, I've spoken about this previously, because it's broken up that way, what we have there is there's Sefer Bereshit, Sefer Shemot, Sefer Vayikra, and until we get to that break where there's inverted nuns, that's the first part. That's when the book of the Chumash. Then there's the 2 pasukim with the inverted nuns, and they are then the 3rd piece of Bamidbar. That gets us to 6 books, and then the Barim, the one we're in, would be 7. Now, what has happened is very significant as they're about to enter the land. The 2 pasukim in the middle that have been bracketed by the inverted nuns, the only place it appears in the Torah, is was what would have happened in the miraculous entry in the completion of history, and Mashiach coming at the time with Moshe. The time of Moshe would have happened if we hadn't done the sins of the Meraglim spies. The surrounding books tell us what parts of this of Bar Midbar numbers, what actually happened. So that is another aspect that he's coming to tell us, that with, and this is where he ends, but I'd like to extend that explanation a bit. That means even though we had the choice of the 39, wound up in extra 38 years in the Bamidbar, ultimately what will happen, ultimately what is going to happen is that promise and the ultimate redemption will occur, and we should take heart. And this is especially apropos of this time of year when we had Tisha B'Av a short time ago, is that Hashem does care for us. He will ultimately redeem us and love us. Now we see that in the next part, which later on in the Parsha, when it talks about the second Parsha of second Parsha of Shema. Now, where Hashem gives us a choice, if we follow His commandments and to love Hashem and to serve Him with all your heart and with all your soul, then He promises to rain, the good produce, and everybody will be satisfied. But if we don't, and we've seen this in history many times, we will be exiled, or Hashem's wrath will come, and then we're told we'll lose the land. And then what happens after that is we're told to put on tefillin, be phylacteries, and if we do that, we do come to the state of return to Hashem. All of the promises and long presence in the land, Messianic times will come. Now, the question that's asked is, it seems strange, there seems to be a little replication between the first paragraph of Shema, which we had, and the second paragraph. First paragraph commands us to recognize Hashem, recognize His kingship, and serve Him. And this parsha is talking about how you got to do His mitzvahs. Now, if you recognize this, question is asked, this question was brought right now, Moshe Shpiro, Zikran Sadik Labracha. He asked a question. If you recognize somebody as king, you're obligated to follow His commandments. I'm not talking a constitutional monarchy like today. I'm talking when kings had power of life and death. You have to follow Hashem, so the mitzvahs come automatically. And if you do the mitzvahs, the commandments of Hashem, this, which we have in the second paragraph of Shema, aren't we recognize His kingship that way? And the answer that Rav Moshe Shapiro, Sikon Sadak Labracha, gives is that effectively that recognizing kingship is not enough. And this ties back in the theme I've been talking about, that we have to do all His mitzvahs, want to learn His Torah, truly love and care for Hashem, which we saw also in the divine plan on the Tu B'Av, is that the first paragraph is command. You got to recognize Hashem's kingship. The second paragraph gives you this choice. And because it gives you a choice, because mitzvahs can only truly be done, there's warnings of what happens if you don't keep the mitzvahs, but mitzvahs can only be done, as he explains, with love and caring because you want to. It sets up a whole new spiritual world for you. And in other words, living a spiritual life by keeping the Torah mitzvahs, something that a person has to be willing to do, because that is giving us an opportunity to enter into a whole new level of world, a new level. And again, this harkens back to the concepts, as I said. Now, what if one does this? And this is how the Parsha ends, is that, and this is talking about the future times, not now. And he says, Ki im shemot yishmro et kol ha-mitzvah hazot asher anati mitzvah
Etchem v'asatam ahavta ahava et Hashem Elokeichem v'leket b'kol darkachav v'yiravacha bo. For if you will observe this entire commandment that I command you, to perform the love of Hashem, your God, to walk in all his ways, and to cleave to him. Chorish Hashem et kol hagoyim elev v'mofinechem v'ishtav v'goyim gedolim v'atzmim lechem, and God will drive out those nations before you, and greater and mighty nations themselves. And kol makom asher derach kaf v'releka bo lechem min midbar Lebanon min ahar nana prat and yam akaron hiyeh v'lechem. And every place where you put the sole of your foot, from the wilderness and Lebanon, from the river, the Euphrates River, into the Western Sea, what we say is some aspect of the Mediterranean. Lo yitzei ish lefenechem v'yichekechem morechekem eten lechem chen Hashem lechem al pnei aretz asher nibracha ba asher dever levachem. And therefore, at that point, it says every place where you place your foot, from the wilderness of Lebanon, from the river, the Euphrates River, until the Western Sea shall be your boundary. No man will stand up against you. God, your holy Hashem, your God, will set your terror and fear on the entire face of the earth where you will tread, as he spoke to you. That means Messianic times, it means the whole world. As I said before, we were promised the 10 tribes, the 10 lands of the Canaanite. Because we were not at the spiritual level to achieve that, we only got the 7. So when he's talking about these boundaries, talking at Messianic times, when we truly come to love of Hashem, do his mitzvahs with love, and may we all use this time as we're moving into a happier part of the more positive part of Tisha B'Av, and then into El, where the King will come out into the fields of God to be close to us if we're willing to go come a little way and meet him. And may everybody have a good Shabbos and Shabbat Shalom.